Well, here we are to talk about the Beatles and the Beatles. I'm Charlie,
And I'm Corey.
and this week we will be discussing the album titled The Beatles, which is better known as the White Album. It's that band's self-titled album from 1968, a double album consisting of 30 songs, one of the most legendary albums that we've done on this show, and this will be a two-part episode because it's such a long album, but we gotta do it justice because of its stature. So that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, it's one of those albums that I don't remember being this long, but only because I've listened to it over a million times. It's one of those albums where you're like, holy moly, 30 tracks. There's some small ones that I guess through time you forget that they're actually track listed, but it's a big one, man.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And we have ended up doing this a bit later than we were planning on doing it. So thank you for sticking it out and tuning in to the show because lots been going on lately, but now things are more settled and we can get back into our groove.
Back into the groove. It's
Yes.
almost like it's almost like we're coming back from Rishikesh to record a double album.
Yes. Yes, that's basically what's happening here. Uh Unfortunately, not quite that exotic of a location we've been in, but one can hope. But one can hope. So yeah, basically, if you don't know, this album basically came about because the Beatles went to a transcendental meditation class in Rishikesh, India, led by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. This was between February and April of 1968, and this was the band was had been huge throughout the decade at this point, but they were this was a really anticipated release because they were coming right after Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Magical Mystery Tour, and Sergeant Pepper's really elevated the band in the cultural consciousness. They were seen as true artists, not just any other band. They were true artists. People were really actually taking into consideration everything that they had to put out there. Their cultural clout was on another level post Sergeant Pepper's, and it was a hugely successful, high selling album with zero singles. So that's where the Beatles were at this point.
Yeah, and it's so wild to think on the other side their interpretation of or how they felt after Peppers, especially Lennon, was almost the polar opposite of this popularity and groundbreaking culture revolution that they had on their hands, and really the reason or one of the big reasons that they all took to going to Rishikesh to really find themselves and find music, Beatles, everything again, or maybe even for the first time for some of them. It was a trip that definitely changed them in many, many ways.
Yeah, and one of the main ways in which this trip changed them came in terms of how they wrote their songs. During this trip, they really took a more back to basics approach to their songwriting, uh, which was a big change, especially after not only Sergeant Pepper's, but Revolver, which were really ornate, at times experimental albums that fused genres. This time, they weren't going to do that. They were going to really focus on one thing for a song and do that. And really, the songwriting was even less collaborative than before. It's very interesting to see so many of these songs credited as Lennon and McCartney when really both of them were writing separately by this point. And George Harrison also had more and more songs to share, and this is the album with the most Harrison compositions of any Beatles album. He gets four songs here, which out of 30 really isn't that many, but he definitely made them all count. And as a result, this album has been described as being the work of three different solo artists rather than a band album. And at times, that is the case. There are essentially solo tracks here. but it's the Beatles. That's the name of the album. Even and it is back to basics, but it's also different than anything they've done before. So
Yeah, and the majority of these songs being written on acoustic guitar because that's really the only Western instrument that they had their hands on in Rishikesh, and then them writing alone. And I mean, I think a lot of people don't know Ringo left during this album, during the
yes,
recording of this album for a little bit. You know, it's very much a precursor to the Beatles that everyone gets to see in the Let It Be documentary, and that situation where I'm almost positive, but I believe Paul has been quoted saying that this was the what's the word he used? The tension album. This was the tension album. And you could really, really see it when you start to look behind the scenes hardcore. Production was changed, engineers were walking off. They were smoking marijuana in little hidden alcoves inside the studio, and Harrison was burning imported uh incense, for lack of better words, all over the studio. It was a lot more mayhem than I thought. And I pride myself on knowing a little bit about the Beatles and my love for them, but deep diving into this recording session was way different than I realized. I thought all that stuff happened in Let It Be, but you know, I'll drop one right now that we'll talk about throughout this album. But this is the first time Yoko comes in, like really comes in,
yeah,
and you start to see this split in the band. It's pretty heavy, man.
yeah. This is the Tension album, and yeah, it took after the trip. The whole band didn't stay together the whole time during the trip. Ringo lasted a big 2 weeks in India, and
Yeah,
McCartney left a couple weeks after that. And then Lennon and Harrison stayed. They were really into, especially George Harrison. India is a huge part of his artistry and life, even converted to Hinduism. So, very much in, instrumental to him. Not his first flirtation with India at all, but
no,
it deepened his entrenchment in their culture, for sure.
yeah, yeah, and you know, it wasn't his first dip in the waters. And I know there's stories that circulate on why they came home and what was the circumstances for each. But it was enough that Harrison wrote, well, actually, a track that's not on this album, but was written and recorded at first for this album called Not Guilty, which he put on a solo album later on, but it was pertaining to like India wasn't all my fault, for lack of better words. So it was a wild one.
Yeah, there was a lot going on there, and other people were on this trip. Other big names like the singer-songwriter Donovan, Mia Farrow and her sister Prudence, all on this course with the Beatles. So, and some other unique characters who are immortalized in song, which is really fun. But actually, not all of the songs included on this album were written in India. 19 of the songs that ended up here were, but some of them dated before that. And they ended up recording it through most of the summer of 1960. And that was the point when Ringo walked out after Paul criticized his drumming on one of the songs and ended up just doing the drums himself. I mean, I would have been pissed too, and he had enough money to just quit, so he did. But he came back. He came back, and yeah, this album does have some pretty significant non-Beatles players on
Yeah.
it, which is also very different for the band at this point in time. So, and George Martin started off producing it, but he didn't really produce all of it, even if he is still credited as the producer of the album.
Yeah.
Um,
It wasn't even it was just about the halfway mark when he went on quote unquote holiday and handed it off to another producer, and who basically just got stormed or steamrolled by the Beatles.
yeah, Chris Thomas, he was a young protege of George Martin. He Yeah. I mean, it was a
It,
good thing
it,
that it was somewhat simpler songs than were done on Revolver and Sergeant Pepper's, but still, you Martin knew how to rein them in. That was the
that's real. If what I read is what to be believed, um, this recording session was the first time that Martin ever raised his voice in any recording sessions with the Beatles. So it just lends another view of how hectic it was. Why this guy who knew these boys in and out had to get mad.
yeah. He got bad with all the foolishness, and they weren't really being as much of a band as they could be. Only 16 of all the songs here feature all four Beatles playing, which is crazy. But it was still a Beatles album, still really highly anticipated, and it was released in November of 1968, the 22nd in the UK, the 25th in the US, and it came out as a double album, which George Martin advised against. He said, no, you need to make a strong single album, but the band said, no, we're not going to do that. And a couple of the members later on said, yeah, it probably could have been better as a single album, but they just all had a lot of songs to get out. And McCartney still stands by it being a double album, and well, so do a lot of people. The album was, of course, an immediate commercial success. Pre SoundScan days, so we don't know the exact sales figures, but it's pretty heavily implied that they were through the roof and people were eating it up, getting the hot wax for it real quick and getting this album. They were ready for it. They were ready for it.
Yeah, something that I don't think they were ready for, and I'll speak a little bit anecdotally here, but they weren't ready for an all white album cover with just a serial number and then four little posters and a collage poster in there. I know I grew up. Now I wasn't around for this release, but I grew up spending hours looking at Beatles covers. Period. Not just Sergeant Pepper's, but all around the board. And there's something beautiful about those covers, and then you get to this and it really, in my opinion, it really lets you know where they are. This is a little bit of Paul saying we're in a new level. It's a lot of Lennon saying we're not doing Sergeant Pepper's, we're not doing this, what he would say, you overproduced, for the masses album. Whether I never took it like that, but I don't think a lot of people did. But he had that feeling on this. So we get this white cover, which is very unique, but a little bit off-putting, in my opinion.
Yeah, that it is. But sales were high still. Capitol Records was able to ship over 3.3 million copies to stores in the US just within the first 4 days of the release, and topped the charts for 9 weeks in the US, total 215 weeks on the Billboard 200. It sold over 12 million copies in the US alone. And it also 8 weeks in the UK at number one as well. And it's platinum over there. And not it wasn't immediately as well received as Sergeant Pepper's. Some critics definitely found it to be a downgrade. It wasn't as adventurous, but a lot of people still really enjoyed the songs and had nothing but praise for the band. And that the stature of this album has only increased over time. It's regularly considered an all-time greatest album. Um, and it's in the most recent 500 greatest albums list. It's at number 29, which it was initially number 10, but the newer list is more diverse. So I think 29 is a more fair ranking. It left more room for other artists because the original version of that list had four Beatles albums in the top 10.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, which it does make sense, but at the same time, it does raise up the concern of there's not much diversity on this list. So let's do that a bit more. And so they did. Now there's only one in the top 10. So
What is it?
Abbey
Sergeant
Road.
Pepper's? Hmm.
Sergeant Pepper's was originally number one, but it's now down to 24, I think,
Hmm.
which is
That that'd be an interesting look. I'm always intrigued by the way that those charts move, or
yeah,
those lists move. I mean,
it is interesting to see how it was done. But yeah, this album still has a really strong legacy and a lot of fans, but it is also a bit polarizing. After all, it is 30 songs. Some of the songs are more beloved than others. And there's a good amount of people who say this is their magnum opus. I'm not going to be one of them personally. I think that's Abbey Road. But it is easy to admire this album for its eclecticism. I think is the main pro of the album for many people. It has a bit of everything the White Album does.
it definitely does have a little bit of everything. I'm gonna stay. My jury's gonna be out until the end of this, whether I think this is their magnum opus or not. But it definitely runs the gamut of all different genres of music and just wild ideas. It is definitely eclectic, is a great word to use for this album.
Yeah, that's the best word to describe what is now known as the White Album. And we've been thinking of doing this album, well, for a while. Beatles are always in the mind of consideration for us, even though it is in a way kind of difficult to do it because their songs are so well known and have been discussed so many times. You have to think, what can you add new to that conversation? But we've grown enough now, of course, that we know we can add to the conversation. And we especially were inspired to do it after Beyonce covered Blackbird on Cowboy Carter. So that was like, well, I think this is the year we do the White Album. So now we're gonna do it.
Yeah, man. Let's get at it.
Yeah, let's get started here. So the album begins with Back in the USSR, side one. Um, So this was written as a pastiche of both the Beach Boys and Chuck Berry, specifically the songs California Girls and Back in the USA. McCartney said it was about a Russian spy returning from an extended mission. So definitely a bit of a satirical song, but it's also a very catchy song. I I remembered this recently, and this is really wild in hindsight. I definitely first heard this song because somebody sang it on American Idol when I was a kid, which is
Okay.
really weird. This is not the first Beatles song you ever thought you would have heard on a singing show, but it did happen. Um, but I remember liking the song and hearing that. I was like, I know this isn't the original, but I was compelled to seek the original out because I saw it on American Idol because I felt like this is a cool, catchy song. I didn't really know much about Soviet Russia at all. Not that I'm an expert now, but I was yeah, intrigued by it from a young age. When the Beatles were first put on iTunes, I did buy this song very quickly. This was one of the first I bought. So I've been a fan of it for a long time. And it was a controversial song, though, naturally being about Russia in 1968. Anti-communist groups were especially appalled by the line, "You don't know how lucky you are, boys." But they were taking the song way too literally. And this song has endured over the years. It has.
Yeah, I remember back in my young days of listening to this album, this was never one of my favorites. And I think back and try to realize why. And it's more so because it is exactly what it is. It's a parody on the Beach Boys, on Chuck Berry. I'm sorry, Chuck Berry, and more so a parody of the thought process of Soviet Russia versus the U.S. and how different they are. No pun intended. It is wild to see how perfectly this song is put together, musically and lyrically, inside of it being this parody, and how strong of a song it is on top of that. It is really one of the ultimate parodies musically, and it's a great opener for this album. Not to get too existential here, but like just in the thought process of the way they are coming back from Rishikesh, this almost anti-hero slash anti-Beatle mentality in, at I'll say at least two of the four, and that'll be Lennon and Harrison. Because in my opinion, McCartney stands stalwart on being a Beatle and being proud of what that means in all eras. But this was just it's such a perfect parody by them, and a perfect, almost like a tiny little microcosm of the Beatles inside, or their mentality inside this song. I read it and I'm not sure if it's real, but Mike Love was apparently in Rishikesh with them, and he was the reason why the line about the girls is in there. Which is, if that's real, that's so cool, because you're literally parroting their sound, and he's in on the joke, and I love that too. So I'd like to hope that's real, but
I mean,
a little tidbit there.
yeah, he did have to admit, Mike Love did say it's a hell of a song and it outlasted the country.
Heard
And
that.
well,
There
I
you
mean,
go. That's a great.
yeah, I'll give Mike Love that. He's a not a nice person at all, in my opinion. Definitely the villain of the Beach Boys, but he does have a point there. It has outlasted the country, and because of um the Soviet Union being a communist nation, many Western artists were not allowed to play there, including Paul McCartney. Elton John historically played there in 1979 and did a cover of this song at every one of those shows, despite being told not to, which is another reason to love Elton John. Billy Joel also played it when he played in Russia in the 80s. McCartney didn't get to do this song live in Russia until 2003, but he got to perform it in Moscow's Red Square, and the crowd went wild. But
Yeah.
interestingly, it has not been included on the set list for his current tour. It's speculated that might be because of Russia the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's suspected he removed it because of that, which
Uh,
that does make sense, even though it is a classic song. But McCartney has no shortage of classic songs to choose from for his shows.
True.
But
True. The Stones on Elton John playing that in Russia back then. KGB, that's some wildness right there. He's a bold man, but we already know that.
yes, Elton John is a bold man, and we love him for it. But
Heard that.
so is Paul McCartney, and so is John Lennon, who we're going to hear from now on the second song of the album, which is Dear Prudence. And Prudence is a real person. She is the younger sister of actress Mia Farrow, who both of those ladies attended the meditation course in India. And Prudence was reclusive during it. She was really hyper focused on meditation, and Lennon wrote this song to kind of encourage her to break out of her shell. That's why he's saying, like, won't you come out and play? And um the guitar technique is one that he learned from the singer-songwriter Donovan, probably best known for his hit Catch the Wind for a couple of years earlier. He's not as well known as the Beatles, but it is pretty cool to see that to read that this guy was pretty instrumental in the creation of some of these songs, even though he wasn't credited as a writer. Uh, I think it's a really nice song. Very like it's a very nice sentiment. It has a nice sound to it. It's not experimental, really. I wouldn't go that far, but it's a solid tune. Is it like in the top third of the album? No, probably top half. It's a good song. It's a good song.
I'm disagreeing there. It's definitely in the top third of this album for me.
Okay.
This is one of my jam Beatle tunes, for a couple different reasons. More so that beautiful use of that arpeggio. Maybe it's just stuck in a uh, a look back mentality for me, a nostalgic mentality. But there's something so beautiful about the arpeggio this song's written on. And then when you do the deep dive and you see where they were, it almost, without reaching, has a bit of an Indian feel in that arpeggio. But then knowing that they're sitting around playing this, with just an acoustic guitar and writing in these meditation senses, it adds that extra layer to the comforting feeling of this song. I love to find out beautiful things, and nothing better to find out that this song was written to really try to get someone out of their room, come out and play for real. There's a scene in Across the Universe where this is sang, and they're talking to a girl behind a wall, and the scene is shot like that, and I always thought that was powerful. To see that came from the inspiration of where this song originally came from, it's a beautiful thing. Always one of my favorites. The bass line in this too, even though it's not something that is super challenging, it's such a striking and strong moving bass line. Always has been, in my opinion. Yeah, I love this song. I really do. As a number two off the back of USSR, it really works to bring, I'll use the word legitimacy, but more so just say, okay, we're being serious too. We're not just doing this huge parody that you got in song one. We're putting some time into this, and it has always been well received for me in the number two spot.
Yeah, I think that's another key tension of the album is there's definitely a split between satirical and sincere in the songs of
Yes.
this album. And it often goes from one song to another. We get that. We're going to see that quite a bit on this album. And we're going to go back to the satirical with the next song. Lennon gets a little sassy with us on Glass Onion, which was written as a response to people looking for deeper meaning in the band's songs. And Lennon calls it out. He references tracks like Strawberry Fields Forever and The Fool on the Hill, to name a couple. But the people are looking through a glass onion, which is basically him saying, like, it's silly. These are songs, don't take them so seriously, is kind of what he's saying. And I think it's a really neat, slightly psychedelic song in its sound. And I like that he's being satirical here and basically saying, hey, you're taking this all way too seriously and giving us too much clout almost. I thought it was pretty neat that this song was one of the ones chosen to be remixed in the Cirque du Soleil Beatles show Love, which is sadly closing in a couple of weeks as of the time we're recording this. Very cool
Mm,
show. Glad I got to see it
very
before it
cool.
closed. But yeah, I
Most
really
definitely.
enjoyed this song. And it's actually the first song here that features Ringo on the drums because the previous two were recorded when he quit. He actually quit during back in the USSR. That was the song McCartney criticized his drumming on. So, yeah.
Yeah, Glass Onion's always been another favorite of mine. I never back then knew what it was rooted in, and it makes total sense. We talked about this on Let It Be, but um, when you find out that this is really one of Lennon's biggest pet peeves is people trying to read into his songs and find meanings where he knows there isn't. There's a documentary called Imagine back in the day where, I'll say homeless, but more so in a traveling nomadic sense. But a fan ends up at Lennon's spot and proceeds to tell him the meanings of songs and why they mean this and why they mean that. And the first time I saw this interaction, it was a little off-putting because Lennon's like, "Nope, sorry to burst your bubble. I'm paraphrasing. Sorry to burst your bubble, but it wasn't that. Here's something to eat, something to drink, but it ain't like that." And I always thought that was super mean, when I was younger, but I can see where he's coming from, and understand that this song is again geniusly done because you don't get that unless you're diving in to look at it. And so it's put there as this red herring of sorts, in a beautiful song about red herrings of sorts about
Yeah.
stuff that doesn't exist. I love it. And they even go as far as to be like, the walrus was Paul, and I'm the walrus. Talk back to like Lucy in the Sky. So they're really throwing Easter eggs in there and having a fun with it at the same time. And it's a beautiful song on top. It is. It's. I'm going to say this a bunch, but it's so neat to really get inside their heads, looking really deep in this album and see where they were on songs that even I to this day didn't really realize some of the things, and this being one of them.
Yeah, very, very cool song. But I'm glad that you mentioned our Let It Be episode, which you should listen to. And listen to our other episodes by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All those links are in the description below. We'll notify you about new episodes, and subscribe and rate us wherever you're listening to us. Give us a nice review. We'd appreciate it. Just thought I'd put that out there before we move on to the next song, another McCartney song, and one of the most polarizing songs, definitely on this album, possibly all time. Oobla di oobla da, a phrase that McCartney first heard from the Nigerian conga player Jimmy Scott, who unsuccessfully tried to get a cut of this song, which I can't blame him for. I would have done the exact same thing. But yeah, good luck getting a credit on a Paul McCartney song, cause yeah, not gonna happen. Um, but very much inspired by reggae and ska music, and I mean, a well-known song, and a lot of people hate it. They find it catchy in the most annoying way. I'm not one of them. I've always really enjoyed this song. It's definitely the first song I heard in its form, like on the radio as a kid. I remember hearing it then. I was like, I like this song. I think it's very catchy. And I still think it is. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And I like the reggae ska sound of it. I don't think it's the best example of all time of it, but I think it works just fine. So I am a defender of this song. Not ashamed to say that I am.
I have had a love-hate relationship with this song forever. I'm not, I don't consider myself in the, oh, it's too campy, I'm not with it group. I'm more so in it never struck me as a kid when I listened to this album. It was a skip. I mean, and for the record, that was a big deal because I had to get up and do it myself. But it was always one that I just wanted to get over. I was never one that stuck with me when I was young. I throughout my love of McCartney through the years, musically started to really enjoy this song, and it started to take on a new life with me. Doing a deep dive for this podcast, I got to really see the nuts and bolts of it. And something that I could never describe is how forced this song felt on this album to me. And it is all here in the background. The music doesn't lie. And this, I always felt like this was forced. And this for me is one of the turning points. And unfortunately, I'll say, in my opinion, I think one of the points where we start to see the Beatles fall apart. And this is Lennon on his side screaming quote unquote granny music shit. This is Paul recording over and over again, throwing it away, recording over and over and over again, and really just making this song on the album where I feel like this song didn't want to be on this album. And again, in my opinion, but it just has always felt forced. And I never could bring that feeling forth, and then found out that this was the behind the scenes on it, and it all makes sense. It's just I've never been a big fan. Musically, it's there. It has beautiful flourishes, and it's composed correctly, but it doesn't feel Beatles to me. I don't know. It's
No,
tough.
I do have to agree. For better or for worse, I do think you're seeing the seeds of McCartney's solo work post Beatles in a
Yeah,
track like this. And I do think that's part of the point of this isn't fully a band album. It is the separate artists recording a solo album. And I think a song like this does exemplify that. But I still think it's, frankly, it's better than a good amount of post Beatles McCartney songs because he was in a good songwriting point in 1968. So I'll give him that. But yeah, a lot of people don't like it, and I actually got to see people hate on it in real life when I went to see McCartney a couple of years ago. Amazing
really,
concert. This was on the set list, and there were these awful people seated right behind me that were talking throughout the concert, which was really obnoxious. I thought, why would you pay all that money for a concert to talk through it? I think that's just a waste of time. Even if you don't love every song, I'm not going to say every song he did was my favorite, but I paid like $200 for the tickets. I'm gonna sit there and enjoy the concert. These people felt
sure.
compelled to make up their own lyrics to the song or something. They seemed to think they were funny. They weren't. I hope those people are having a bad day. I
Oh
just
man,
they were so rude. There was even one point when he was telling a story about losing John Lennon and how, like, he said, I never really told him I loved you. And the woman behind's like, because of toxic masculinity. Like, shut up. No one wants to hear what you have to say. Let him talk. He's 80 years old. He's from a different era. Uh,
yeah,
so, yes,
some
I hope
people,
they're having a bad day. Why would you do that? Came very close to
some people,
ruining the concert for people. They were horrible.
people. People like to make points where there are no points. I'll tell you
Yeah,
what, though, you made a good point on the post Beatles McCartney. That's that. I'll give that to Oblada. It is better than some post Beatles McCartney. So there's another
yeah,
silver lining in that one.
yeah, yeah. Because all artists have their primes, and frankly, McCartney was in the songwriting prime when he was with the Beatles. I mean, he did 4 songs from this album at the show. So, and that is the first of them that's shown up here. So
The
we'll get
question
to the.
is the next song in his prep?
Oh, if only that stadium would have been so confused if he had done Wild Honey Pie, which emerged from a Rishikesh sing along. It was included on the album because Patty Harrison, George's wife, who later married Eric Clapton, she liked it, so it made it on the album. I mean, yeah, it's a joke song, doesn't really need to be here, but I'm not angry to hear it. I'd never seek it out, but it doesn't like make my head hurt, so I don't feel like I must skip it, and it's less than a minute long. It's there. I can't be too
Yeah.
angry at it, you know?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed, even especially when Anthology came out and you got to hear all the like little snippets Paul would do or whoever would do in between tracks, and they threw them down. I'm glad this one hit. This one, I talk about when I was a kid. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at my own anecdotal thoughts here, but even as a kid, this is one, I guess, my weird musical tastes that I would seek out. I still sing this walking around the house to this day, especially in these past couple of weeks listening to this album. But there's just something pure and magical, I will say, about this weird little 52-second musical rant. You're right, it's there. It doesn't to make me mad. Of course, it doesn't make me mad, but it doesn't take away. It doesn't because of who is recording this album. In my opinion, it doesn't do anything detrimental. In fact, you're like, oh, here's a little crazy snippet from these wild geniuses.
Yeah, and they're gonna keep being a little silly on the next song, which is the continuing story of Bungalow Bill. Bungalow Bill is a real person. His real name is Richard Cook III. He was a college student who went to visit his mom in Rishikesh, and his mom was not too popular amongst people. She was basically what we would call a Karen, it sounds like, in 2024, is what she would be referred to as. Didn't sound like a very fun person. And uh, yeah, he ended up taking a break from the camp to go shoot some tigers, which only
You
in
know,
Rishikesh, India. Um,
yeah,
so bizarre. So Lennon discussed this song in a 1980 Playboy interview where he said, quote, Bungalow Bill was written about a guy in Maharishi's meditation camp who took a short break to go shoot a who took a break to go shoot a few poor tigers and then came back to commune with God. There used to be a character called Jungle Jim, and I combined him with Buffalo Bill. It's sort of a teenage social comment song and a bit of a joke. And Mia Farrow supported this account in her memoir and also commented that the boy's mom was not popular and nobody was too upset to see her leave the course.
I
Especially,
can only imagine this. I mean, you're
it's
literally at a meditation jam and you're like, I'm going to go hunt some tigers. I'll be back. I'll get back on this meditation stuff in a minute. It's so wild.
yeah. This is it's a crazy story, but it elevates the song for me. But fortunately, I like the song too. I think it's a funny song. It's Lennon really did tap into his funny bone on this album. I think all of the band did at some point, but I think he especially wrote some great satirical songs, and they're some of his best here for sure. And yeah, I really enjoy this one. This one's been stuck in my head whole time we've been research. I've always figured, hey, Bungalow Bill, what did you kill? It's just, it's just a fun song. I like this one a lot.
Yeah, I've always loved this one too. For me, there is a beautiful childlike sensibility when Lennon is his most open and most really musical inside of the Beatles era. I'm not talking about Lennon afterwards so much, but when you really, in my opinion, when you get to see the best of Lennon, there is this childlike, not childish, but childlike sensibility and humor and just openness that I love. This was always the children's song of the album for me. When I was younger, it was almost like a I don't know, like a sing along from a Sesame Street or something like that.
Yeah,
Growing up, it was
I can
always
see
that
that.
kind of song. And then as you grow older, you enjoy it for all types of different reasons. And now this deep dive, hearing this anecdotal story, like this real thing, and thinking of these guys at this meditation retreat, sitting back laughing at this overprivileged person who thinks they could just come in and out of a meditation experience to, of all things, go shoot tigers. It's such a wild, you grow up thinking that this is just a nonsense children's story, or I did, on the album, and then you find out that it's rooted in real life. Just hilarious,
Yeah.
hilarious. But and as far, this is where I'll stop for a another look at the pacing of this album and the way this album is laid out. It's a perfect complement to Wild Honey Pie, or Wild Honey Pie is a perfect complement to it, but it flows perfectly, especially in the days of these vinyl recordings where there is no real reason to get up and skip. It's right there, it makes sense, and it goes along. And then they check us again on the next track.
Oh, yes, they do. One of the true Titanic songs on this album. Has a huge legacy outside of this album. It's one of those tracks. It's While My Guitar Gently Weeps. George Harrison wrote this song, his first of four compositions on the album, and he read the Chinese Book of Changes and decided to apply its principle to his songwriting. He just picked up a book, saw the phrase gently weeps, and wrote this song. He began recording it in July of 1968, but the band wasn't really like feeling it, even though it kind of commented on the state of how the band was interpersonally at the time. But George just did it himself and got Eric Clapton to play on it, and the rest is history. I mean, this is one of the songs I've heard so many times. It's such a classic rock radio staple. What in my grocery store days, I heard it every day. Over those loudspeakers all the time. This was one of them. And I mean, it's not hard to see why Harrison felt stifled as a writer when this is what he wrote. This is a classic for a reason. I mean, what else can you say about While My Guitar Gently Weeps? It's While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Of course, it's a classic. Like, I don't know what else to say.
I mean, it is. It's such a beautiful song. Aside from it being a classic, it is so wild to think that the rest of the band wasn't about this song. Just the way it's laid out, the way it's a moving, really well composed song, period. I remember the first time that somebody told me it was Eric Clapton on this, I called him a liar. And I was like, Eric Clapton didn't play with the Beatles. I mean, we were young, don't get me wrong, and this is pre-internet, but I didn't even believe it the first time I heard that. It's still wild to think that he was like, hey, I don't even care. It's my song. Come in and play. I'm not even tacking on what happens in the future where your wife leaves you for him, but just the fact of Clapton playing on there. It was, I forgot to say it on Bungalow Bill. It's like one of those White Album things where we used to always be like, who's playing the flamenco guitar on the lead into Bungalow Bill? And it was, again, pre-internet, and then the deep dive into this, find out that it was just a flourish in the Mellotron standard tape library. Like, just crazy stuff. But going back to Clapton, it was mind-blowing to hear that he was on this. It doesn't take away from the beauty of this song. Well, I couldn't picture it without him. This is one of the ones where, again, we're seeing the breakdown of the Beatles, but in my opinion, shame on those boys for not holding him up. We talked a lot about it on Let It Be, and I'm not going to, beat a dead horse here, but it's just very wild to think that they weren't pushing him up and supporting him even at this point in their career.
Yeah. And I mean, Eric Clapton has revealed himself to be a pretty shitty racist person in recent years. Um, and also a violent asshole. But his playing is an integral part of the song. I can't take that away from it, even though the man is not somebody I'm particularly fond of. Not going to take away the playing and this song from him. I won't do that.
Yeah, man. One of the very few superstar guests we ever see on any Beatles recordings.
Yeah, very much so. But I mean, it's such an integral song that this was played at George Harrison's solo Rock Hall induction, quite famously by an all-star band, very famously with an epic solo by Prince, who I will mention at any chance that I get because I love Prince.
Oh yeah,
So even though we're talking about the Beatles, if we can shoehorn in the purple one, I'm gonna do it.
there you
Because
go.
that's what I do. But yeah, while my
I'll
guitar.
shoe. I was gonna say I'll shoehorn in. This is one of my favorite Fish covers.
Oh yeah. I
I love
saw
to
that
hear
they
Trey play this.
I saw they covered quite a few of these songs actually over the years. They covered Bungalow Bill too.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
Quite
man.
quite a few others.
They covered this album.
Yeah, no wonder you wanted to discuss this so much. No wonder. I'm what? Yeah, no, they did. They have done these songs.
Yeah, man.
I'm sure it's sick to hear them do it. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's an experience.
one of those ones you'll never hear again. But that one gets played a bunch, and nothing better than hearing Trey do Happiness. I mean, I'm while my guitar gently weeps.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, speaking of happiness, I'm glad that that wasn't your children's sing along, cause yeah, not a kid's song. Happiness is a warm gun. But it's kind of like 3 or 5 songs in one. Lennon said it was sections of 3 different songs that he put together from it, and the title came from an issue of American Rifle magazine that George Martin had just laying around. Which that's inspiration right there. That's a genius songwriter, and yeah, Lennon said it was a double entendre about guns and sex. At times I don't think it's even a single entendre. I mean, it's pretty obvious what he is doing here. George Harrison was really able to help put this song together though, because he had a lot of knowledge of complex time signatures like the ones used in the song because of his knowledge of Indian classical music. So he didn't get a writing credit on it, probably should have. But he's a big part of why this song came together. It was pretty quickly singled out as a highlight, but it was banned by the BBC for its suggestive lyrics. This one is very highly rated amongst fans. It's even been put in top 10 Beatles lists of all Beatles songs. Maybe a hot tea take. I can't say I agree with that. I think it's a great song. I do think it's a bit overrated. I don't think it's not top 10 Beatles for me. Top 10 of the album, yeah, sure, but all Beatles, not quite. I don't think it quite reaches that level, but still a great song.
Yeah, definitely a good one. This one, I'll double entendre aside. I always growing up, more so in my teenage years, I thought this was about drugs.
That makes
I thought,
sense too.
yeah, I thought this was a needle type of thing. I don't know if that was because I saw it portrayed like that. I can't remember if it's been portrayed in the media like that before. But anyway, I always thought it was something to do with drugs. It's wild to see him saying, I wrote it as a parody on people that think happiness is an actual warm gun. But that aside, it's a beautiful, beautiful song. It's such a cool 3 song mashup. And another part of the deep dive is really seeing that this one, they all had to really buckle down. They had to polish or dust off some old skills and really get down to it, and it really challenged them, and I like to see that amongst all the angst and tension inside this album. So that adds another level for me, but I've always loved this. And then to finish it off, it finishes off side one and was always such a cool, I talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot, but like the songs that make you want to flip an album in anticipation. And I always felt this was such a great ending to the first side because it's soft, but it hits hard in almost like an older like blues style piano. It really smacks it to you lyrically without coming hard across musically. I always dug that. But yeah, a great ending to side one of this album.
Yeah, and now we're going to flip it over the side two, and I'm imagining you might have been a bit disappointed by the big shift tonally and musically with track 9, which is Martha My Dear, which is named after McCartney's Old English sheepdog, but not really about the dog. It really was more so written about his breakup with Jane Asher. By the time he recorded this song, he was actually seeing none other than Linda Eastman, soon to be Linda McCartney. Um, I mean, this song has some very nice musical elements of it. I really don't love that Victorian piano line. It's really corny. This is granny music. This is granny music, not obla di obla da. What? Yeah, just not a highlight of this album. There's good points of it, but it should have been used on a better song.
Uh, we couldn't be on more different sides of the coin. I was infatuated with that Victorian piano line as a young musician. I I this song is one of my favorite compositions on the album. I wasn't at all sad when I would flip this because this song speaks to me so much musically. It starts off Victorian, and then we go to these English French horns to bring that English sensibility, that Beatles sensibility, and we never look back. This for me is the closest we get to the Sergeant Pepper sound on this album, or one of the closest points we get to the Sergeant Pepper sound on this album. And I dug that as a young listener.
Okay, yeah, I was not expecting that. I was not expecting this to be the infatuation song. Wow. For you.
I'm at, as a Beatles fan, but just period. I love out more so as a Beatles fan. uh, in their music, I love when there are giant horn flourishes. It speaks to my favorite era of the Beatles. One, yeah, my favorite era of the Beatles, and I can't get around that. The Martha, my dear, it always brings a smile to my face. It's one of those ones, especially when they get up into the high register, singing. It's my jam.
Oh, no, granny music all the way.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe English, Grant.
English granny music, that works. That makes sense to me. English granny music.
But it plays well into the next one, in my opinion.
Uh yeah, it does, which is I'm so tired. Okay. Um, this was a song that Lennon wrote at the retreat, and it was about how tired he was. This has been considered by some to be a sequel to I'm Only Sleeping from Revolver, which I think is a better song by a mile. This is the first true Lennon filler for me. He loved the song. I wish I did too. I just think it's kind of a boring song, and it has a certain kind of Lennon vocal styling that you hear on certain songs, but I this song makes me wish I was listening to Across the Universe instead when I hear him singing that particular style. This one's not one I go back to.
Yeah, it starts off. I can see where you're at. For me, it's really the bridge of this song that grabs me, if anything. It I When I was younger, I always felt musically it sounded like a weaker Bungalow Bill at first, in the way it was composed. But once you get to that bridge, and I give you everything I got with a little piece of mind. I love that. I love that. Maybe it's grown on me. It's definitely not in the upper echelon of this album, in the upper third of this album, but it fits here. I will agree. There's a lot more Lennon sensibility, especially later Lennon after this, inside of this, and maybe one of the first true looks at that. This is not, maybe a little tiny bit, but not more so the Lennon childish sensibilities that I was talking about before.
Yeah. But fortunately, the next song is, well, I would say it's in that top third at the quality wise, but it's most definitely popularity wise. It's actually the most streamed song on the album. Blackbird, lyrically inspired by race riots in the US. McCartney saw it as offering encouragement to the oppressed black woman, and the tune was actually inspired by Bach's Bourrée in E minor, not a bird, actually. But this song has been interpreted many different ways despite his explanations of it. But I think that's a sign of brilliance that this song can be interpreted so many ways. And it's a short song, pretty simple musically. It's an acoustic track, but it's a beautiful, beautiful song. It's not hard to see why this is the most streamed track on the album. Yeah, I've always really enjoyed this song, and he did do it when I saw him. Not surprising that he did because it's such a iconic song. in his repertoire. And it was one of the highlights of the show because he just got to do it, him and his guitar, and his voice isn't quite what it used to be. He can't quite do the really high notes like he once did, but a song like this is perfect for his current vocal styling, and it was a highlight of the show for me. And he did other acoustic songs, but this was the best of them, which just shows you what a great song Blackbird is. It's Blackbird. It's iconic. It's amazing. Yeah, it's Blackbird.
Yeah, it really is. It all of the, I'll use the word extra, but all of the proposed meanings or anything, I'm gonna go with Lennon on this one and just take it as it is. There's huge nostalgia on this one for me. It was one of the, if not the first song that I learned how to finger pick a guitar on because of it. And that simplicity aided me in figuring out a lot of Beatles music. Period. It just aided me as a young, early musician, even as a young listener. Though it was just, there's something about when such a pure and beautiful song hits. There's something about it that transcends, just like this song has. There's no getting around. It's a beautiful song. It really is. If I had to put one, I don't even know how I'm doing this. Put one negative on it. It's just always sad to think of Paul recording this by himself with nobody else in the studio because they were all in this angsty, turmoily crap. I if you go back and listen to Let It Be, I go off on rants about this. I carry them in such a high regard that it makes me sad and mad when they're not functioning as a unit on a full level, like I grew up thinking they did all the time. So,
Yeah,
not to
we
take
we
anything away from it.
we really did have so far picked the Beatles albums where they did not function the best as a unit. We'll have to change that, I think, for the
And
future.
that
Uh, but
that's where all the tea is. That's where all the tea
yeah,
is.
that is where the tea is. And well, this next track we're about to discuss is nothing but tea. Piggies, a George Harrison composition. It's a commentary from him that was inspired by George Orwell's work, particularly Animal Farm, and it mocks the middle class. And it's one of the most controversial songs this band ever recorded. There were some who really thought it was just too silly to be a serious commentary. Others adopted it as a theme song and loved it. Because it's like, you know what? George Harrison's with us. That was how they took it. But when you're a band as big as the Beatles and you sell a ton of albums, not everybody who picks up these albums may have good intentions in their heart about what they want to do with their life in general. And uh one of the people who picked up this album in the late 60s was Charles Manson. And he heard this song, Piggies, and he interpreted it as a warning to the white establishment to prepare for an uprising. He frequently quoted the "piggies need a damn good whacking" line, and the word pig was written in blood, which connected his 1969 murders. So George Harrison was naturally pretty appalled that this song was interpreted this way by Charles Manson and that it had nothing to do with American policemen or California shag nasties, in his word. So, but Manson, he also interpreted Blackbird as part of his agenda. And spoiler alert, unfortunately, we'll be talking a bit more about Manson in the second part of this album because it did affect this album's reputation a bit, and particularly this song. It's not considered a great Beatles song, and I'm not going to say it's the best thing ever, but I do think the Manson Association is has I do feel it's unfairly hindered the song's reputation because I do like the song. I think it's a funny, clever track, and it has some unfortunate history behind it, but I still enjoy the song, and it's another proof of just what George. It's no, it's more proof of what George Harrison had to offer in his songwriting. And I appreciate it for that.
Yeah, I'll go out straight up and say I grew up a long time thinking this was just taking for granted this was a John Lennon song, because it speaks like a John Lennon song to me in its sarcasm and it just the way it's formed. It doesn't seem like something George would come up with. It doesn't seem, it seems way too snarky for old quiet George, in my opinion. And I always just took it for granted as a Lennon song. I've always dug it though. I go back into, as a young listener, it was another one of those kid friendly songs, if I will, but more so of like it was another family kid song on this beautiful album that I enjoyed. I love the fact that that harpsichord was in Studio One, and they were like, let's do it on the harpsichord. So they moved all the gear over to. I'm glad they to the subtext of the English middle class. It really musically adds to that. So something cool, a little cool tidbit about that one. But it's definitely one of my ones that I always enjoyed on this album. And the Manson stuff is just the other side of the coin that Lennon had the foresight to see, and too many people are looking to us for spiritual answers and political answers and life meaning answers. That's not what we're doing. We're here making music.
Yeah.
So that's a tough double-edged sword. It's a tough double-edged sword, and that does stink that any of the songs got bad names. We'll definitely go into it more on the second half of this album, but Piggies didn't deserve that.
No. And what neither did any of the songs really, but that does go to show you that when you take art too seriously at times it can be interpreted dangerously. So it is a bit
Yeah.
of a cautionary tale. A rather early one. We've heard more stories like that about music since, but this is definitely one of them. Fortunately, Manson didn't take to the next song, it seems, which is Rocky Raccoon, which is a story song about Rocky and his girl leaving him for a man named Dan. They get in a fight, and Rocky is treated by a gin-soaked doctor. McCartney said this was a spoof of a folk singer, which I can definitely hear. It has that storytelling element to it. I think this is I feel like this is his Bungalow Bill, really unique character story piece, and it's a really fun one. These songs kind of I these like character pieces, they kind of actually remind me of like the early 70s hits that Cher did, like Half Breed and Dark Lady. Like I wonder if the writers of those songs were influenced by these Beatles pieces like a Rocky Raccoon, because they're these really off the wall stories, but they're a lot of fun to listen to. And I think McCartney's having a really good time, and he's showing that he could also use humor in his songwriting in a way similar to Lennon, even though he was often called the corny Beatle. He could be really clever and funny too, and I think a song like this shows that. And the more vaudeville-esque musical elements don't hurt the song for me. It really works for this satirical thing we're going for, in my opinion.
Yeah, it never struck me as satirical when I was young, but it was one of my favorites to listen to. And a lot of it was that vaudeville style, that ragtime style piano in there that aided this awesome Old West story. As a kid or someone who's listened to Arlo Guthrie's Alice's Restaurant every Thanksgiving since I've been born, it had that Arlo Guthrie sensibility to it, listening through the years, and something that I enjoyed as taking it for what it is, and it's non-satirical meaning, just really enjoying the song. It is been with me throughout my whole entire life, so it's really hard saying anything negative about this song. Not that I really think there is anything negative to say on it, but I mean, I've lived with Rocky Raccoon since I can remember. One of my favorites of all time. Christ, I played it on guitar today for my kids because now I got to pass this along as we've been listening to it um, over the last few weeks, and seeing my 4-year-old take to songs that I took to without me even shoving it down her throat, just having it on and then hearing her sing the words she thinks are being sung. And Rocky Raccoon's one of them. It's one of those timeless pieces, even though I think a lot of people don't know it. It is one of the timeless pieces on this album for me.
Yeah, it's as much of an album. If it is kind of a deep cut, as much as anything on here can really be a deep cut, because it is a Beatles
Or
album. None of them are really deep cuts. Let's not kid ourselves here. Um,
I
not
I
not
also can't believe, my bad, not to cut
Go
you off, but I
ahead.
can't believe that this was recorded in a single session. It's a very intricate song to be recorded in a single session. That one blew me away.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah, but we're gonna kind of keep the country going like we did on that song with the next track, which is "Don't Pass Me By," which is the first complete Ringo Starr composition on a Beatles album. He'd been trying to get the band to record it for like 4 to 6 years, but he finally got it done. And well, you know what? It was a double album. They had room for him. So we got this song, and it's very often been considered one of the weaker songs here. But Ian Fortnum of Classic Rock Magazine actually called it one of 4 songs that showed why this album is a blueprint album. And wrote that it was poorly served by the McCartney-led arrangement but represented a Southern rock exemplar par excellence, which is an interesting take. Like, I do kind of wonder if this song would have been better served by a more Southern rock kind of, like Creedence Clearwater-esque kind of sound to it. But you know what? I think it's a lot of people like the drag on Ringo, but I think this is a good first songwriting effort for him. I think he knows that he wasn't on the caliber of his bandmates when it came to songwriting. He was in many ways just happy to be there. But I mean, you gotta start somewhere, and he has made hits of his own, and I don't think this is a bad song, but I definitely can see where it could have been better.
Yeah, it's funny hearing that take with the Southern rock sensibility on it because as far back as I can remember, I remember singing along to this song with a over exaggerated Southern twang. Don't catch me by, don't leave me blue. Like I've always this song like this. It's how it spoke to me. Even more so at growing up, I always thought that this was another sort of parody on the Western or American like Southern country here. I always, and again, going to the parody part, I always felt like that fiddle part throughout this whole thing was just out of place and weird. And it always struck me like that, even at that young age, especially the way it trails off at the end. I can sort of dig that more as an older listener, or I do dig that more as an older listener because it's that raw recording feeling that they were going for. I must say, I'll take this over Octopus's Garden any day of the week, any day of the week, as far as Ringo songs. But yeah, I always thought this was a play on Southern country or Southern rock. And that's just the way I always took it. I dig this song, don't get me wrong. And it flows, going back into pacing, it flows out of Raccoon really well and musically.
I find that interesting that you kind of think of it as like a play on a thing you could have interpreted, because I think it's one of the more sincere songs on the album. It comes in between two obviously silly songs. Especially this next song, which interestingly is the subject of a lot of tension, which considering what this song is about is really bizarre. Um the next track is "Why Don't We Do It in the Road?" Paul McCartney wrote this song after seeing two monkeys mating in India. That's the story. This song has two lines in it repeated. And yeah, he recorded this song mostly by himself. Ringo provided some percussion, but it was a Paul tune. And in his 1980 Playboy interview, John Lennon stated that he was really upset that Paul recorded this song without him. Paul said that John and George were working on other songs. He just decided to do it. He didn't see it as malicious, but Lennon really took it personally. And it's like, but it's just a very odd thing for me because Lennon seemed more disenchanted with being a Beatle than McCartney did. Yeah, he was so upset he didn't record Why Don't We Do It in the Road of all songs. I mean, it's like it's not like he left you out for Back in the USSR or Blackbird. It was Why Don't We Do It in the Road. And you know what? This song would have probably been better served if to be used on McCartney's first solo album because it definitely is a solo track. And I mean, I think that Jacob Stolworthy of The Independent summed it up best by writing that this is as good as a song inspired by the sight of two monkeys having sex on the street in India could ever be. And I agree with that. I'll say he's having fun here. He's letting it rip vocally, having a good time, but yeah, it's Why Don't We Do It in the Road? That's really
This song is my jam, but
it's a
only
banger. It is like
yeah.
very catchy. It's stuck in my head all the time. I don't know if it's I think it would have been better served on the McCartney solo project. That's all.
Yeah, I always knew McCartney was singing this, but it never dawned on me that Lennon wasn't. I figured he was in there some means with this gritty singing because I will say this is I can see why Lennon was pissed. I didn't know that until this deep dive, but I can totally see why he was pissed. I even read that Paul McCartney had said, or I'm paraphrasing, but it was suggested that it was an obvious, glaring eye for an eye statement because he wasn't asked to be on Revolution 9. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can see where Lennon would be like, "What? This is the stuff that I like to record like this. We're hooting and hollering. We're jamming as hard as we can. This is exactly what I love to do, and you know it." So it's interesting to think if that was really behind Paul's reasoning for not asking Lennon to be on this. Again, we're in this angsty schoolboy standoff inside of the studio during this album, and a lot of it seems silly. But then again, it's what brothers end up doing to each other to antagonize one another. I really am curious to. I just wonder if Paul did that on purpose, but I can totally see why Lennon was mad not being on this. It screams Lennon to me. It always has. I just thought it was all them for years.
If only it were. If only it were. I mean,
There's nothing like screaming singing this song while you're doing the dishes or
it,
just maybe throughout high school and my early college years for the fun of it.
just for the heck of it, why don't we do it in
it
the road?
it's a it's a life mantra, and I'm not going into a sexual mantra. I'm talking about just let it all hang out there. You know, why can't we do it all on the road?
But Paul is not all jokes. He also is sincere, as he is in the next track, which is I Will, which he started in India, but it got revamped. And it was the first song that Paul McCartney ever wrote about Linda Eastman. So definitely a significant entry in his catalog right there. And yeah, he wrote it as she was about to move in with him in London. And took him 67 takes to get this song right, but I will say I think it was worth it. He said it was one of his favorite melodies he ever wrote, and I can totally see why. This is a really pretty song, and it's not corny. McCartney's been accused of writing really corny or, well, silly love songs, as we all know, but I don't think this is one of them. I think it's a genuine, from the heart, pretty song. And I think it's good to have it here because the previous few songs have been really like kind of silly. Like we've just heard Rocky Raccoon and Why Don't We Do It in the Road. So it is good to have something a bit more sincere to kind of get us closer to ending out the first record of this album, and especially before the next song.
Yeah, it's something that you cannot deny the vulnerability and just full on love that you can hear in my opinion, in Paul McCartney's voice here. Um, it's a beautiful one, and knowing that it's written in the time it's written and for who it's written, it adds that extra layer. But it's up there as far as love songs that are whole and true. I've always enjoyed this. In my younger years, it was more of a skip or a not fully invested, but as I've gone through life, it has definitely been one that I gravitate and really resonates with me. So I enjoy this. I'm with you though. This is pacing wise and thought process wise, it's a really smart move because we move back into not losing the listener, but we rein the listener in and say, okay, we're going to get serious for a second again, which they've done in my, and I'm not spoiling anything, but so far in this album, they've really done that almost perfectly, musically and thought musically and the way these thoughts are put together. This album, as eclectic as it is so far, in my opinion, has been pretty perfectly paced.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. Very well paced, and it continues to be with the end of this first half of the album, which is Julia, a Lennon composition, and one of his most revealing compositions ever, as it's about a really significant person in his life, his mom, who was named Julia, and he had a really interesting and unorthodox history with his mom, because he wasn't really raised by her. He ended up leaving her care in 1945 and going to live with his aunt because his aunt was pretty concerned about Julia's raising of her son. She thought things were up. She even called social services on her, which is really crazy to think about. And as for what the intentions behind that were, we'll never know. All the people involved are now deceased, so nobody can tell that story, sadly. But Lennon was still really close with his mom. He visited her every day, but she really tragically died in 1958 after getting hit by a car. So he lost her at the age of 18, and that undoubtedly affected him for the rest of his life, as it would anybody. And Yoko Ono also made her way into the song as her name means child of the ocean, and that is referenced in this song as well. That is a lyric as well. So this is really one of the most revealing and introspective songs that Lennon ever wrote. We really are getting a look into the man with this song and his relationship with Yoko Ono. I think this really explains a lot of what he was thinking about when it came to her and their relationship and its complexities. So I think this is definitely one of my favorite Lennon Beatles compositions because it is so revealing and just lets us in, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, we get these beautiful windows every once in a while in the Lennon discography, whether it be Beatles or solo, and this for me is up there in the top. Um, Not only indisputably open and personal about his mother, but as much as I might have a mixed feeling and a negative feeling towards where Yoko Ono had positioned herself inside the band and inside his life personally, it's another undeniable thing that he was very much in love right here, and this was a perfect bookend. Just these two were a perfect pairing to hear Paul and John so in love and so open and so just introspective in these two. And it's a really, really great way to end this first half and this second side of the album. When I was younger, I used to think that he was singing to Julian Lennon in this, and I always thought this was Julian.
That's a
But
very
that was
rosy thought right there.
when I was younger. I always thought it was like a bedtime story, but beautiful all in all of it, nonetheless, and a really great way to finish this half up.
Yeah, that we have finished this half up. And we've got a second half to go, which is going to be a possibly even wilder ride with more Charles Manson. But I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to it. Beatles are always so fascinating to discuss. And now we have reached the end of this first half, which I'm a bit sad about, but I'm really happy to dive into the second half. So stay tuned for that. And well, yeah, when you come out, it might be your birthday, it might not be, but you'll be able to celebrate when you have our next half out. If you can decide, I am curious though, what would be your favorite track from the first half of this?
Oof. You gotta Rocky Raccoon. Rocky Raccoon. I love it. It's a part of me. Maybe that's me going with the easy nostalgic answer and not breaking down musically, which my favorite is on the front. Um, Rocky Raccoon. While my
Um,
guitar gently weeps musically, I think, but Rocky Raccoon is my jam piece of all time.
I mean, I think nostalgia, you kind of gotta go with your gut. That's why I'm going with Back in the USSR.
There you go. There you go.
That's my jam.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, I
we've
can't
got
wait. I can't
even
wait to do the second half of this.
Neither can I. Neither can I. Can't come soon enough, but we will be doing it soon. And just, yeah, stay tuned in them with your Racky Raccoons and your Bungalow Bills, and take care of yourself until next time.
Peace.